Remind me, when did this like seed get planted for the book?
About a year ago. Maybe
You did this in a year?
Yeah, but it's been like years in the making. I've been wanting to write a book for probably like since I finished school, but so
I think your next book should be how to get shit done with a wife and kids and a full-time job.
that
If
could
you
be.
can do
Yeah.
that in a year, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely had lots of help, and it's like 150 pages, right? So it's not like the longest of books. So and I was cutting. I probably could have cut more. I would like it if it had been shorter. So yeah.
When you wrote it, because my take on it was this is the perfect book for a coach to give to a player or a parent to give to a player or a player to invest in themselves. Because I think it's got just the right amount of meat on the bone, but I think also the fact that at least, through my lens, it seems that through the own personal stories that you share of when you were coming up, it's very much player focused. And I think it just, I'm like, man, as a young person, this is really easy to dive into and gain a really good understanding of just how you operate between the years.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So that's the main intent, but it'll be good. Like coaches will still get some out of it. Other people can, parents can get something, but yeah, the intent it's because that's our whole business is coaching athletes. Like we don't coach coaches a lot or like we do some, but like my main business is coaching athletes. So
well, I would think it's valuable because the way the book's structured, I mean, I would think that other people in your industry might have same strategy, different terminology, different language to describe it, maybe some different analogies, but it's the same thing. But just the fact that if a coach reads this alongside their players, it allows them to refer back to some of those strategies. And I think that's what's great too, is this is, it's all very practical.
Yeah.
This is something a coach can reach into and pull out, anytime a player hits a stump or just needs a little fine tuning. This is something you just, it would seem that there's a tool in one of these chapters to cover, I would say, most of the stuff that we can all relate to as coaches.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So, and that's the idea. It's supposed to be concise and very practical. Like there's like the downloadable PDF, like the worksheets. There's like pretty much an exercise for every chapter, right? And it's like, oh, here's the worksheet for it. You can do it and fill it out. So those are great.
Well, the other thing, and we'll dive more into it, but I think in the same way, because I think when I heard the word mindset, I always think mindset is something that gets turned on when you're in an athletic performance, or mindset gets turned on when you're going into a big meeting, or mindset gets turned on when there's sort of a point in time interaction. And I think coming out of this, I'm like, actually, no, like mindset is breathing. Mindset is something that is on all the time, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. And with that being said, I would be a huge proponent if we taught financial literacy in schools. And I would be a big proponent if we taught health and wellness, not gym class, like health and wellness, like how to take care of the one and only body you got. After reading this, I'm like, we should be teaching mindset in schools. And this book, there should be another version of this book that doesn't have a hockey sort of cover on it. It should be in young people. And when we do that, like I should get some of the royalties on that one.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm tongue in cheek, but seriously, like I think there's so many valuable takeaways for young people. And again, I would say everybody can benefit from it, but specifically just the way it's structured, it's easy to digest for young people. It's excellent.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I am like, oh, do I do a soccer version? I could do other sports. And then I also, my intent too, I don't know if I told you this. I'm not trying to write a New York Times bestseller here. Like, I'm like, just get a micro book that was the initial seed a year ago. I was like, do a micro book, get it done and out there, make it hockey specific. Cause that's my main market to start my background. And cause I was like, well, if I'm going to write a book, it's gotta be really good. And it's like, I'm like, oh, no, it's like, just do what I know and like, get it out there, get version 1 done, something out there specifically for hockey. And then, like I'm probably going to write some more. So I don't know yet. I'm just settling getting the one done as for now, but yeah, no, I do want to write more because I think it's a good medium to get what I know out there. So.
No, absolutely. And again, I just, I think probably at this stage in my life, like talking with pals, like the idea of writing a book will occasionally come up in conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and I know this came up between you and I
Yeah.
a while back.
Yeah.
I think to date, you're the only person I know that's actually followed through on putting pen to paper and publishing it. So bravo. And
Yeah.
that's a big win.
Thank you.
Um, a couple of different places we could start.
Mhm.
But one that I thought was really interesting because it's counterintuitive. And I saw it at first and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. But after like reading through it, I really connected with it. And that was the screw it mindset. Can you
Oh
elaborate
yeah.
what you mean by that?
I think the screw it mentality is such a fundamental way to help somebody let go. And the way to kind of think about it is one of the main issues and challenges that athletes and people get caught up in is we're holding on to the results, right? It says, I need to, I have to, and I should. And there's nothing wrong with having goals and intents around external things.
But
And
can we,
so,
is it fair to say, not to interrupt, but
yeah,
that when you talk about, it seems like there's a difference between having goals
yeah,
and being obsessed with the results. And I think it's easy to
yeah,
think that they're one and the same, but I think you do a good
exactly.
job of saying these are two separate
Yeah,
to focus on.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But usually they get lopsided in, and then
Yeah.
that way we can't detach and just be free and in the moment. So it's like, yes, you've got a goal and an intent, and you can really, really want that goal and intent, but you're not holding on to it. The whole world doesn't evolve around this one external thing. There's an ability to let go of that and the variance within that, and just be immersed in the moment. And who do I want to be right now and get after it? And so the screw it's, or the efforts, if you want to use more flavorful language, but I use with some of the older athletes and stuff,
Yeah.
is a good, parable that comes from the book, The Brave Athlete. It's a really good book. But anyways, the point being was, well, when you're going into a situation, and if you're like, no, I need to, I have to achieve X result, well, how's that going to work out for you? Like it's usually not very good. So we want to let it go and get into a place of just screw it. Well, how do we go from need it to screw it? Well, the analogy is, well, actually think about another option, which is you could quit. I do this with players and athletes all the time. I was like, if you really can't accept you might not score in the next game, or as a coach,
Yeah.
like you really can't imagine, you really can't accept that you might not win this game. Well, then maybe you shouldn't be coaching, or maybe the player shouldn't be playing hockey, because that's the reality. And so I don't want you to quit, but I want athletes to remember it's a choice. We choose to coach, we choose to play. And when you choose to play
Great
something,
point. Yeah.
right? And if you choose to play something, what choice are you making? Need to, have to, should mindset, or screw it. Let me just go play my game, enjoy the thing. I have a goal and result, but it's not fully in my control. I have a lot of control and influence over how I play. But when we look at it this way, that screw it mentality is a really, helpful, especially when someone's in a tough time, having a hard time letting go. It's like, well, you could quit. Like, and it's, and again, we don't want them to do that, but it helps give perspective, to give choice, to like, all right, well, then what mindset am I choosing going in? So, and we can unpack that in a lot of ways, but it's a good fundamental one.
No, you know what's interesting, man? Like right before we jumped on here, I had a call with so Ben Cooper is one of my partners with the coaches site. He coaches over in with Red Bull Salzburg, and we were just catching up, and he's asking about my little guy, and I coach him U7. He's like, how's that going? And I'm like, it's great. And he's like, how old are the kids? I'm like, they're 5 and 6. And you can just tell, he's like, oh, that sounds like a lot. And I'm like, I said, you know what? And I mean this. I'm like, everybody, I'm like, I'm going to be, if I ever get back to coaching at a competitive level again, which may or may not happen, but if I do, I'm going to be so much better than I was before from going through this experience. And it's exactly what you talk about. Like, there are no results at that level. Our kids think they play games every weekend. We just scrimmage. But because the adults and the coaches aren't focused on any kind of results, the development that's taken place is way better.
Yeah.
The atmosphere at the rink is way better.
Yeah.
And I've been like chewing on that for a while now, especially like diving in your book. I'm like, man, like I understand how difficult that would be to bridge if you're coaching competitive hockey. And there's probably coaches now that are like, you're out to lunch, so you couldn't. But I'm like, I really think that there's something to be said there. Like if you could just literally get yourself in a mindset at the rink every day where you're like, I'm not coaching to win on Friday. I'm just coaching to create the best environment possible and maximize improvement. You can just kind of live like it's powerful. It really is.
Yeah. No, it's huge. And it's in any area of life. And that ability to detach from the result and just be in the moment. And it allows you more likely to achieve the result. That's the whole paradox, because
Yeah.
you're enjoying the process more, you're more in the moment, they develop more. And you see this at the high levels in all sports and all fields. So it's a fundamental way of looking at like, who do I want to be and how do I want to show up versus what do I just want to achieve? And that's the mistake when we go into, as a coach going into a game, oh, I got to achieve this. Here's all these external results. Then, you're so caught up in the moment. It's like, no, we want to have perspective. Like, this is a choice. There's a great clip online. I think it's the series Limitless with,
Bradley
uh,
Cooper.
no,
The
the other
movie.
guy, he plays Thor, is in it.
Okay.
Anyways, that guy, name's
Poor guy.
escaping. Yeah, the Thor guy.
Yeah.
And it talks about like him, like imagining when he's like 50 years from now. And his
Yeah.
wife, and it's just like, but the perspective to like, oh, what really matters now when you look that far ahead and that kind of
Oh
perspective,
man.
right? It's like, oh, let's enjoy each moment and cherish, that we get to do these things versus we have to, we need to, and we should language. Like that shift in perspective and mindset, can allow us to create better environments, which lead to better results. But more importantly, like, we do only live once, and how do we want to live? So yeah, the Screwits is a nice way to summarize that.
Well, and I'll just putting a bow on this. You did your language is much more eloquent than mine. I can remember, I think with similar intention, did a coaching presentation last year, and the way I framed it, I'm like, design your season as if you're going to lose every game, and design your season that you can still be happy and feel good about it. If you can design that season and you're going to lose every game, then and just live with it, whatever comes out of that, you're going to be in really good shape. But I like personally, next time I do that talk, I'll talk about the efforts
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll add one thing in
yeah,
there, which also summarizes it, is like have an internal definition of success. Because I really like what you use there. Like, what if
yeah,
you're going to lose? Well, how do we know we internally succeeded? And so,
yeah.
and so
Fair
I
point.
use that framing a lot in the book as well. But, and even like just thinking of myself, in this past, like with releasing the book, I'm like, how's it going to be received? I'm starting to go into the external, right? I'm like,
Yeah,
no, internal, like creating this. Okay, well, I'm certain in who I am and my experiences, and I don't need the external validation. Of course, I would like the book to do well and get those and do all the marketing and write a good book
yeah.
so that it does externally well, but like not allowing it to define me. And so, because it's the first time I use the analogy of like, being like a painter, and I've been painting and selling paint one-on-one. Okay. Right. And I'm getting good. Like, oh, you
Yeah.
want some paint? Yeah, you want. So that's all my one-on-one coaching. And now I've created like a gallery where now people can just walk in and comment and come see the
That's
paint really
interesting.
easily.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, oh, and I've been working on it for a year, let alone years before, but really to create this book and have it well written and published and edited. It's been like building this, and now the gallery's open, like just open this weekend, right? Like the book just came out. So it's like, okay, like, so no internal definition, and make that internal stronger than the external, right? And that's what we're doing when we say screw it. And that's what we're doing when we come mindset first and all the stuff within the book. So yeah. So when you said 0 point season, no win season, it's like, oh, that person, that team has an internal definition of success.
Yeah, absolutely. I never thought to. Here's another thing I think, and it's timely. I'm pretty sure I brought this up in recent conversations just because I'm a total nerd and I love Nick Saban and I listen to all this stuff. But he was on the Pat McAfee show and he was talking about how he uses performance coaches and sports psychologists. Like he's always like, I've had him on staff since I was at Michigan State.
Yeah.
And the story he says is, he goes, it's not just for obvious reasons. He goes, a big reason why I have them there is because, the message doesn't necessarily change a lot, but how we deliver it needs to change to engage the players. And I think so much of what your book does, and I think for coaches that read it, I'm pretty confident that this will happen, is because you use a lot of great analogies and because of how you frame a lot of these topics, which we're all familiar with. It's going to plant a creative seed in the minds of coaches in terms of how they deliver their message, and take that simple message, whether that's through storytelling, whether that's through some of the graphs that you have. And I think it's just a really good exercise. And I imagine, like, for somebody that you've been doing this for your entire professional life, but writing the book probably challenges you to find new and creative ways to share the same message that you've been sharing for years now. And I think that's such a big part of coaching, is just saying, like, how do we get helping people connect with the message in a meaningful way so that it's top of mind. And one thing where I had to really pause and think, like, when they say, like, if somebody's panicking, like, you never tell somebody that's panicking to calm down.
Yeah.
Because then the opposite's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And I thought about this too, the part when you talk about the chapter about confidence, and I'm like, and you say, like, don't tell somebody to, like, stay positive or to be positive. Like, it doesn't do anything. And I'm like, so true, right? Like, when somebody's down in the dumps, you say, hey, just think positively. That hasn't worked for anybody, but that's probably the advice that I've probably given a lot, whether it's to players or friends or whomever. The confidence thing is such a big part. And I think sometimes it's an area, I would say, like, confidence is almost like goaltending. A lot of coaches shy away from even broaching, because it's like, I might say the wrong thing. Because I might need like a 10-year degree to actually dive into the subject. But can you maybe shed some light just on some practical tips on how to help players be confident when they hit the
So confidence is a huge one. I think we get right into it in chapter 3 is this whole thing. And one of the first things I'll note for coaches, be very careful to tell an athlete, you're struggling with confidence. You need to just play with more confidence. Because the amount of players that have come to me and their coaches have said that to them. And then what is that telling the player? They're starting to believe they have a confidence problem. And they're like, I didn't think I needed more confidence, right? So it's like, sometimes we're perpetuating, creating a problem where there isn't even one necessarily. And maybe we just want them just to own their greatness even more, right? They're kind of like downplaying themselves. We want them to own more of it. And so now we're starting like, you're not confident, and they believe it, which is why what we say in the book, and when I say to athletes all the time, I say, I actually don't like the word. We try to generally actually avoid it with an athlete. It's like, because the word's so tainted. It's so associated with the external results. Well, when I'm scoring, I'm getting points, things are going my way, I'm confident. And when I'm not, I'm losing confidence. So it becomes this hard thing to work on if that's the definition. So instead, talk about players with owning their capabilities, which is what true confidence is. I've got a set amount of capabilities. I want you to own all of it. And there's so many players that are just shy of that. There's certainly some players that own all their capabilities, and especially ones that are going well, and maybe that's more of their predisposition. But the premise for a lot of players is like downplay themselves just a little bit. It's comfortable to like, hey, I'm a 94 player in the league, but I'm going to look at myself like an 85. Like, like I'm comfortable here. And it's like, no, own all of what you are. It's not about becoming arrogant, but it's about owning your capabilities and owning your greatness. And we can't make someone do that, but we can make them aware of it and know that they have the choice. And a good way to kind of frame this as well is like the whole identity piece, because then people have this identity that's like, well, I'm just someone that kind of downplays myself. I am someone that has a confidence problem. I am someone that beats myself up a lot. Says who, right? Like, you're saying it about yourself. And so we want to help the athlete have the perspective, like, well, how you talk about yourself matters, and the narrative and how you see yourself matters.
Sure.
Yeah. And
100%.
so then as you're starting to, you want to help athletes, like, maybe it's not that they have a confidence problem, but they just don't have enough of it. They're not owning enough of their capabilities. We'll talk about the word capabilities is going to be more tangible instantly, and talk about it's like, hey, let's push your comfort zone. Let's build a new narrative or flip the switch. That
is this kind of the alter ego part a little bit too, which I think is really helpful for play. And I thought, that was a great way to put it, because I think it's like, it allows, I don't know if this is the right word, but it's almost a little playful in the sense that, like, a person and or a player can imagine what they'd like to be, but they're not committing it to it. It's not hurting anybody. They're not announcing it to the world, but just within their own mind. It's like, hey, like, how would you like to handle this situation? If you had a magic wand, how would you approach it? And I think, I've used this with kids, younger players, to say, like, hey, like, how do you think, like, no right or wrong answers, but how do you think Sidney Crosby gets ready for a game?
Exactly.
And is there anything, once they define that, it's like, okay, what about what you just described isn't accessible to you? But I thought the whole alter ego thing is, I'll tell you what, the more I've come to cross paths with, and I mean, we deal with obviously a lot of coaches, like high level coaches, I'll tell you what, I don't care how long you've been coaching. When you walk into an NHL locker room as an NHL head coach for the first time, it's different. And if anybody thinks that those people aren't going through some of these exercises and maybe alter ego, they're kidding themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, my mentor who coaches me, and for the last almost 3 years now, Todd Herman, he didn't invent alter egos. It's been around forever, but he wrote the book, The Alter Ego Effect. And he actually worked with Kobe when Kobe created the Black Mamba, which is pretty much.
Did Kobe create the Black Mamba?
Yeah, him and.
Can we do
Todd,
that ourselves? Can we create our own thing and just make a nickname?
Yeah, I know. So I come up with all kinds of cool ones with different athletes, but yeah, so that's a pretty legendary alter ego is the Black Mamba.
Oh, man.
And one of the ways to also think about it is you're just playing, like you said, it's a playful creative, like, hey, let's build our narrative, right? Think of like being the author of your own story. Like I had actually a good athlete tell me this last week. He goes, yeah, like sometimes I'm letting the coach write my narrative for me. If he doesn't play me, then that means he's writing the narrative. It's like, no, I need to write the story myself. I'm the author of my own story. And so you need to take control. And so the alter ego is a helpful, playful way to do that and can be so powerful. And one of the things which was funny, I was telling you before, we were at the butterfly conservatory here in Canada. And think about butterflies. They go from a caterpillar and then they go in that cocoon and they come out. It's this transformation where you can evolve as a person, especially when you go into a new level or you want to own your greatness or do something you haven't always done. That power is already within you and you've tapped into it before, but there's this light switch moment. There's this identity and narrative and the story starts to click and resonate. And that's what that alter ego chapter really helps do. And it helps, shift our self-talk at a more fundamental identity level. And so a very, very powerful tool. And, it ties right into the confidence piece.
I'm just curious. So I'm not saying that like everybody should name their alter ego and that they want to go and necessarily publish that or make that super public. And I think with kids too, like kids can be cruel. If you started calling yourself like the whatever, you hear about it.
Yeah.
However, in saying all of that, is there perhaps a value, whether it's confiding in someone like yourself, a parent, a friend, or etc. This is just something that, like, I look at our coach site journey, and it may not always happen on the time frame that I would like, but I have personally found that there is a great power in announcing to the world, that I'm going to do something, or that we're going to be the coach site is going to do this. Like, we're going to host a conference at the University of Michigan. Haven't booked it yet, but I'm going to make that happen. Or, hey, we're going to do this new platform. And it's, I think that as coaches too, and again, not focusing so much on the results, but here's the step-by-step process and just announcing that, hey, this is my alter ego. And this is kind of what because I'm saying it out loud. Now, all of a sudden it becomes a bit more real. And there's almost a bit of, you feel like you got to live up to it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think you definitely want to share with others. How much and who depends on who you are and where you are. Right. And there's the right time. You don't want to share it too early. You don't want to share it never per se, but you definitely want to have somebody that's like gives you accountability, it gives community, gives someone, like when we work with someone, it's like they tell us and it's like, well, then we're going to loop back and check in on them a week later or whatever it is. And so if a coach get their athletes to share it with them, but it's like it doesn't have to be everyone on the team knows. Some of the teams I work with, sometimes everybody knows most of them, and some people are like, oh, a little more reserved. But having other people to interact with and share what you're working on or what you're doing and what you're committing to, because that's a huge part of the alter ego, is like you're committing to an identity, a narrative, to mental states that you want to show up as. And when you announce that, and then you can take ownership of that, and then there's accountability automatically because you've announced it. So yeah, I think the sharing piece is important. Again, everyone's got their own unique predisposition and how funny is the name or quirky is it, right? So maybe they don't want to share it, but like, I think some of the best ones have been super quirky. And again, not many of my athletes share them publicly, but some of them, they're not shy about it. And a lot of them will like put little symbols or something on their helmet or their stick or their skates or little reminders and stuff. Right. So, I think I told one guy to get his tattoo, but I was joking and I don't think he did yet. So I don't think I'm responsible.
Oh man.
For tattoos yet, but that would be funny one day.
But do you not think that I'm speaking as a coach now, if you had a culture where your players, maybe not out in public, but internally, your players could
Yeah.
share their alter ego and could be as
Yeah.
silly and off the wall as they wanted to, and they knew that they could express that and not face judgment,
Yeah.
would that not be the
Yeah.
definition of an optimal
Yeah.
culture?
Yeah, to me, that's what like the teams that I've worked with, that's what we encourage because it's like
Yeah.
if this is not a safe place, then whoever's not making it safe, you're out. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't want them a part of your team anyways. Doesn't matter how talented of a
Great
player they
point,
can
man.
be, right? Like if this can't be, if this isn't a safe place to share our vulnerabilities and what we're working on and what matters, to like we're not a team. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's one thing if someone on the other team's chirping you for it, like which is a whole other issue, but like they're not supposed to be your teammate. So you're out there going on the same goal. So yeah, so I would, I don't think it's an inherent issue, but again, you want to be cautious because maybe it depends on the age too. Maybe you got a 14-year-old and he's just not ready to do that. So as a coach, but like, hey, it's encouraged, not mandatory. Try to get your people that are willing to do it first to start sharing. And as they share, more people will share. And it creates this, I think one of the teams I had, they like printed them all out and were like sticking them in the locker room. So they all each had their own little like image and they create like a little graphic or a name inside like the locker room. They were playing with that a little bit. So like you can create, like we all talk like a little personal scorecard. So that's like, well, what are those 3 traits? What are the, like, it's not just a name, but the traits. Now you've got like this little, easy, 3x6 little card in your stall and stuff like that. Like there's all kinds of fun, playful things you can do with it. And again, like it's the accountability. Like, you said your 3 things are this. Well, you're not showing up with that swagger with the puck, or you're not in attack mode defending, or whatever the traits are. So
Yeah, you know what? It's funny you talk about that. So we made this shift at work at the coaches site. So we use a process. It's called OKRs, objectives and key results. It's sort of a goal keep. So every quarter, everybody has their OKRs. And what we used to do is it was just sort of like this check, and we're kind of management. You created yours, you checked in, and then at the end of the quarter, we reviewed it, and it got stale. And I think that people just sort of, and what we found is that we were like, I think people are just kind of putting down what they think we want to hear. And then we switched and we had like check-ins as staff. So you just had to buddy up with somebody. And ideally it was somebody that you might not work together with on a day-to-day basis. And that changed everything because now it was meaningful. Now, like, it was funny how like you would think the accountability, because I mean, quote unquote boss, but like it wasn't. When it was peer-to-peer, that's when it started carrying a lot of weight and it mattered. And you could just sort of sense internally. It's funny, like I went through it too. You feel, a lot more accountable to what you're saying when it's in that environment. It's kind of one-on-one. So yeah.
No, for sure. And you can be more personalized and more creative in it too, right? So it's those kind of things. No, I think that's great.
How you also talk about that your opinion, not yours as in Cassidy, Dr. Preston, but yours as in the individuals, is the only opinion that matters. And so when you go through this process, is there not, because I think the worst I think most human beings will ever feel is when you have an unhealthy conversation with yourself in the mirror. Because you feel like you said the wrong thing, or you didn't show up as you like, and you just beat the snot out of yourself. So with that being said, that your opinion is the only one that matters, I think that's great. But is there some coaching required, or what might be the coaching required to help young people, especially, say, hey, when things don't go well, here's how you kind of have a conversation in your own head to make sure you come out of it better versus, 6 feet underground?
Yeah, no, great point. So one of the ways I like to frame it is, and think of like the teenagers and the athletes that are maturing. It's a natural maturing process that we start to create our own identity, and our own opinion matters most around who we are as individuals. And the hard part, though, as an athlete and a high performer, we really care about what everyone else thinks, right? And then often we'll put our coaches or our parents or the scouts or everyone else's opinion of us, the person, the individual, ahead of our own. So then it's like, well, I like myself and I'm happy with myself if everyone else is giving me praise or everyone else is saying nice things. And we stop developing our own internal sense of self-worth and self-image because everyone else's opinion matters more. And it doesn't mean that other people's opinions don't matter, like your coach or your parents, but it's like, it's your life. And to take ownership of that, we have to put our own opinion first and foremost and to self-reflect. So this can be way easier said than done, right? Like it's, as a human person, we're so caring about what everyone else thinks. So, and because it's, not a bad thing to care. It'd be kind of weird if you care about no one ever, right? But
Yeah.
it's how much do you care about others versus how much do you put your own self opinion of yourself first. And one of the ways to help shift that is first just point a flashlight on it. And because most people don't have this kind of discussion,
It's kind of like
especially,
the pink elephant part.
yeah, it's a
Like
pink elephant. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
It's like, hey, like, oh, I didn't realize I wasn't putting my own opinion first. I'm putting my parents' opinion on me. Like they're worried about the car ride home, or what the parents going to say, what the coach is going to say. What if I turn it over? What's the coach going to do, or my teammates, or the scouts, etc. So there's all these external things. It's like, no, they do matter, but how do you see yourself? And start asking that when players self-reflect on the car ride home, or with their coaches, or if at all, are they owning their wins and how they talk to themselves? Like, to me, it's a non-negotiable to write down or reflect on, what did I do well today? What's going well? What momentum? But the individual has to do that. Not parents telling you, not coaches telling the athlete, not external things praising the athlete. That's not the same, right? We want the athlete, the individual, to learn to own their own capabilities and own the things they did well, even when they had a okay day, or even if they had a tough day. There's still little things they did well. We want to build that habit of, my opinion matters most. I'm going to self-reflect. I'm going to build more wins and momentum. And yeah, there's still stuff to work on. I'm not saying don't focus on that, but and it's not like I don't take feedback from other people, but it starts with me, and I'm taking ownership of my career and my development.
What age can you start this at?
I think it's 8, probably. Like, like
Yeah.
how much it looks like at 8 versus what it looks like at 12 versus 15. Like, it's going to look different. But to me, self-reflection is a non-negotiable. In what ways and what are we self-reflecting on, right? Like, we got young kids. I got my kids to self-reflect. They're 5. It's like the quality of that's pretty low right now. It's like, hey, what did you like today? What did you do well? What did you learn? Like little questions like that. Like,
no, it's interesting. We had Roger Ronberg on the podcast a little while ago. So head coach in Frölunda, super bright guy, really interesting. But he talked about, like, obviously not with 5-year-olds, but with professional players, like the questions you ask are so important as a coach if you want to get the information that's actually going to help you. And I think that it's so funny. You just gave the example with your own kids. Like, it really changed my mindset, because, like, I don't know if you can relate to this. Like, I'll ask me, like, how was school today? I don't want to talk about it. Or what'd you do at school today? I did nothing. Really? You did nothing? But then if you say, hey, who was funny at school today?
Yeah.
Or what was what was the game you played on the playground? And all of a sudden you start getting some feedback that can, in this case, the goal is just to have a conversation and be engaged. But those questions you ask are so important. And I would really encourage, and again, I think a really valuable part of the book, like when I went through it, was that this is going to give you some great ideas on the type of questions, not in a formal, like as if you're interviewing a player, but just to have in your back pocket. Because I think, you talk about this too, about there's moments when a coach can make an impact, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the challenges is, depending on what level you coach at, you may not have access to all those moments, or at least not the frequency you have. Your moment might be like 15 seconds in the lobby while a player's walking into practice. And just to have, instead of just saying, hey, how are you? If you can have a couple questions in your back pocket that are going to make that player think, well, holy cow, like, coaches actually cares about me, or they're asking me questions about me. Those are just some pennies you can drop in the trust jar throughout a season.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. The quality of the questions we ask ourselves and others dictates how they learn and grow, dictates the quality of our life. And so, like, and even it's just as little things like, hey, what did you do well today? Like, what did you enjoy? Right? What was hard? Did you get to do anything hard today? Like, it's like get to and hard. It's like, we want to do hard things. It's how we learn and grow. Like, what were we learning and growing? And like, even things like what are you grateful for? What's going your way? And as like, what are you excited about? What do you want to work on? What are your priorities? Right? Like, what's something you're doing well you want to keep doing? What's something you want to work on? Like, it can be little things that And then there's more not, nuanced things, and we can dive into it a bit, but I really like to like give percentages when we're working with an athlete on a mental state thing. Like, hey, are you owning all of your capabilities today? Did you have that swagger and fully flip the switch, or did you hold yourself back a bit? And it's like, no, I wasn't at my best. I wasn't 95 plus, we like to use instead of 100%, just to avoid the perfection. It's like, no, I was like 90. I almost owned all of it. Okay, well, what do we got to do to get that last little bit?
Yeah.
And it makes it more tangible, because when we're talking about mindset, mental state, they're not so tangible. So it's like we can create questions that actually make them a little more tangible. And that's what we call that personal scorecard. And you actually score yourself on these traits and characteristics, et cetera. So versus just the external scoreboards all the time.
Totally.
And nothing against Corsi and all these other great stats that are going on out there. I think those are great and they're helpful tools. But being able to make more tangible the intangible is a very helpful process, because that's why, again, a lot of athletes struggle with it and don't know how to work on it and don't know how to optimize it too, because then they'll settle in the 80s and it's like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. So now I want you to really own all of your capabilities, not just to be pretty good. We call it like, where do elite athletes settle? They settle in the 80s and 85. So like, oh, I'm doing pretty good now. But it's like, no, when the super elite, they get to the 95 plus range is what we call it, because they're doing their best day in and day out. Not good, not pretty good, not above average, but like at their best. And that number evolves over time. And that's something as a coach, or, and a coach listening, you can't make someone have that mentality, but we can encourage it, and we can shine light like, hey, you're not owning all of it all the time. You're not doing your best most days. You're actually getting a little complacent in this 85 range, we like to call it. So that's a huge question reflection piece as well. Like, might not be a 15-second conversation, that one, but it's a good nugget for a lot of players. Yeah.
But you can start to see how all these conversations start to drive alignment, right? And I think another, we talk about moments. One of the moments that we all have as coaches, because we're all behind the bench, is the conversation you have when a player comes back to the bench and you want to dissect a play. And normally, and I'm putting my hand up as, captain guilty on this one, it's really easy to say, that was wrong, pat on back, that was right. But we create these decisions that get made within the context of the game as right or they're wrong. And I think particularly when it's communicated that it's a wrong decision, and if you're coaching younger kids, I think this is especially true, the player already knows that they've made a mistake. So by the time they actually put a foot back on the bench, they've had that moment from the time this mistake was made. If they know they're going to be told that it's black or white, I think they are, by the time they get to the bench, they've just created this veneer that it's like, you could say whatever you want. Like nothing's actually going to. So Ken, and you provide, I think, a great strategy in the 3-4 attack mindset. Yeah. And it's effectively just creates space for a conversation to say, hey, like there's no right or wrong here, but that play that just happened, how would you frame that? And instead of providing two options, good or bad, you provide 5 options where a player can name it. And I would think that through that, a coach might, at least that gives a coach an opportunity to say, well, actually, I think it actually kind of lines in here. And this is how I saw it. So next time we can kind of, we can view these decisions in the same light, and you're inviting the player to take part in it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, a big thing I'll shy into, because it's so easy to fall in this trap as a coach, is to judge. That was good. That was bad. This is right. That's right. So black and white. And that creates a ton of overthinking. Right. And so like when you use like the 3-4 mindset and these 5 categories as an example, well, there's a spectrum of plays, and we can get the player to self-assess and we can see if we're in alignment. But the idea is like, I encourage coaches to be mindful and try not to use right or wrong too much. Hey, that's the play we want. This is not the play. We don't want that play. We do want something more like this. And there's going to be situations where things are a bit more black or white, but a lot of times the game there's a ton of gray area, in the sense of like, your job out there as the player, and remember that as a coach, but the players you're just trying to do what you feel is best. That's how the best players play. They're not, well, I got to do what I think is right. It's like, that's the player that's overthinking. And they're trying to control and force it to be perfect. So it's like, so our language as coaches, though, creates so many players that overthink, because, okay, you got to make the right play. You got to shoot more. You got to pass more. You got to do that. You have to, need to, shoulds, right, wrong. Like the players are just so consumed with thoughts about what they should be doing, that they're not in the moment being aware and then doing what they feel is best. And when a great player goes around doing what they feel is best, they still make mistakes. They'll still make a decision and maybe shoot when they could have passed. And if they start beating themselves up and like, hey, well, I can't make any more mistakes, then they'll stop trusting themselves again. And then they start controlling it again. And they're worried about right and wrong. I made the wrong decision, and they beat themselves up. Even when you do what you feel is best to make a mistake, learn from it. And that's when they go in that coach in that moment of impact, the player gets back. Well, how are we learning from this? Okay, well, let's assess where it was. Was I trying to force something? Was it a mental mistake? Because sometimes it is just half the time, probably more than half, it's a mental mistake. When a player is like not making the right decision, there's a mental mistake because they're worried about making the right decision. It actually has nothing to do with their decision-making ability. It has to do with the mental state they're in. They're in a panic, tense, fearful one. And then coaches are getting more mad that they're panicking, tensing, fearful, which is making it worse for them. It's like so we see it all the time. So,
and this is where like my mind kind of went when I was like going through this part. It's like when you're driving, like when you're in a rush to get somewhere, when you're stressed about being late for something, do you drive better?
Yeah.
Or do you drive worse? I drive worse. Like I'm a shitty driver. If I know that I'm like, man, I'm going to be late and I'm trying to text somebody to say I'm going to be late, like it throws it off. But if you're just like, hey, it's okay. If you can just accept that I'm going to be late, I'm going to get there when I get there and it's out of my control, then you're a little bit better. One thing that I would take out of this in particular, if it goes, you do one thing is that and I got to go back to my notes here because you have cool words for everything. Collapsing the nightmare, which isn't what it sounds like. So my takeaway of collapsing is effectively a way of having a frank and honest discussion with your players to say, hey, whether it's as a team or as an individual, we're going to talk about things not going right because things aren't going to go right sometimes. And we're going to have a candid conversation about how as individuals and as a team, when they don't, how we're going to process that and quickly move on. So it doesn't linger or bleed into the next game, practice, event, etc. And I think I'm in reference, I'm wearing my MCDC shirt. So I got this. I was at the Detroit Lions, Green Bay Packers Thanksgiving game a couple weeks ago. MCDC, Motor City Dan Campbell, becomes such a huge fan of Dan Campbell, the coach of the Lions. I'll use this as an example. So the Lions they're having a great season. This is their third year with their management group. They haven't won a lot going into this year, but they're potentially a Super Bowl contender. But Thanksgiving, Green Bay, huge division rival, they get embarrassed on their home field. And this is the place where what's supposed to happen is the coach is supposed to use words like, we got embarrassed, we let ourselves down, our fans are like all this rhetoric, all this coach talk that we're so used to hearing. Not Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell gets to the podium and says, hey, I believe in our guys and I know we're going to bounce back. And I know that this experience is going to make us better because we're going to have our best week of practice because our team has so much pride in their performance and each other. I know how they're going to react. And you listen to that, you're great. And they just went out and beat the wheels off the New Orleans Saints this week. But I go back and because I'm a nerd and I watch this stuff really closely. Since he's come in, despite all the losing they did in the first 2 years, he has never left any doubt. He never lets that enter the conversation. It's always forward, we're growing, we're getting better. And I think just again, going back to your point about collapsing the nightmare, how valuable it is to have a playbook. And I imagine, if you're a coach that's doing interviews, like you need that same talk with yourself. Like, how are you going to handle the rough stuff?
Yeah, I love that. And it comes from John DeMartini's work, who's one of my mentors as well. And he really collapses not just the nightmares, but the fantasies, because they always go hand in hand. Right. And think about
that's interesting. Yeah.
And so when you think about, what are the the nightmares, let's start there, as you like the failure, the mistakes. And so many players have that fear and want to avoid the nightmare. And it's like, you can't avoid it. It's going to happen and we can be prepared for it. And we can see, like Dan said, what are the benefits actually when it does? And if you have that mindset more in advance, then you don't get shaken and thrown off. The body language of the athlete isn't so negative as soon as something doesn't go their way. Right. And so you can tell what someone's mindset, and if they have a fantasy nightmare, generated inside their mentality already, that person's way more emotionally charged. They get elated, deflated. And so Dan sounds like a great example. He's staying even keel. And so not only do you want to collapse the nightmare, so we bring it up, we still don't want, it's not the goal and the intent is to lose or make mistakes, but we see it as part of the process. You can't completely avoid it. But you also need to collapse the fantasy, because as long as athletes and people and individuals and coaches have the fantasy on a pedestal, being like, oh, be like, if we just win all the time, things would just be great. And this is the goal. Like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's now a target on your back. Things might not go your way. Like, there's pressure, there's expectations. You might, lose touch of the fundamentals, whatever it might be. But it's like, it's the goal and the intent, but we don't hold it in a fantasy. And so we need to collapse both, actually. And usually people are so worried about their fears, but their fears are driven by what you fantasize about, because you're worried about not achieving this, if that makes sense. If I don't achieve this, I'm here, it's a nightmare, right? So we actually want to collapse both. And it's a great conversation to have with your players. That's going to help keep them more even keel. So what are the benefits if things don't go the way you want? And what are the drawbacks if they actually do? And it gets us in this more even keel state. And one of the funny ways I like to explain it too is like, think about just scoring. And like, I go and I score. Well, I think it's good. I got the intended outcome I wanted and I liked.
Yeah.
What does the goalie think? Goalie thinks it's bad. It's judgment. It's, a nightmare. Didn't get what he wanted. Well, what does the ref think? It's neither good nor bad. It's just a goal. And so it's our judgment around the goals and the intent. So yes, it might be something I like, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? And likewise, the goal against for the goalie isn't all bad. It's just a goal against. It's part of what he signed up for. You don't want goals against? Don't be a goalie. Like, as I use in
it's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really, interesting discussion that a lot of people, again, talk about coaches judging things, right, wrong, good, bad, fantasy, nightmare. And we create that in players, and there's an emotional roller coaster versus Dan, as an example, is staying centered and certain about moving forward. And whatever happens, I own it and we just move forward. We make the most out of it. And doesn't have a fantasy that they're just going to win all the time and things go great. He doesn't have fears of the nightmares of his team getting blown out on Thanksgiving weekend or whatever. Right. So, the fact that he's responding that quickly tells me he's in a centered state. He's not, he's collapsed that nightmare. So,
yeah. And you know what, it's so interesting with that too, because I mean, again, just with some of the coaches we work with now, and we had an event with, Bruce Cassidy last week. Yeah. And he was talking about it. He's like, such a big part of his job is like, there's a camera in your face every single day. And what you say to that camera is equally as important to what you say to your players in the locker room in private. So you better be in a mindset where, to your point, like you're even keel. And, this doesn't get brought up in the book, but I thought about this a lot, is I think as coaches, at least call it from my generation, you're brought up that when things go bad, you bring the player's integrity into it, right? It's because they went bad because you didn't care, or you didn't care enough. And, or, things didn't work out. So we throw it out there. It's like, you didn't prepare enough. Well, what if they did? And they just didn't get the result? But I think it's like in our mind, like that's sort of the default response. And I'd say it almost flips on the other side too. Things start going well, and it's like, well, I'm just going to call their integrity and say they're complacent because we had a bad break. And I think like I took this note when I was going through it, and it was like the power of always assuming good intent. Even if you think it might not be there all the time, like if you approach things and always assume that players have the right intent, and then you can maybe coach them directionally and not bring their integrity into it, that you probably do yourselves a lot of favor. And I think we always hear about like today's athlete. It's like, Gen, whatever letter at the bottom of the alphabet, that they just care about themselves. Like, I feel like they're just a little bit more self-aware, and they're not as accepting of having their integrity questioned when they might be like, hey, I didn't score the goal, but like I did everything you told me to do in practice, and I followed the process. I just didn't get the result.
Yeah, no, I think judging the integrity, judging caring, is a very dangerous one. Judging work ethic is also dangerous. You guys aren't working.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So it's like, which is, now it doesn't mean somebody can't work harder, but it's like, usually, like I say this to athletes too about the coaches. Nobody wakes up and it's like, I'm just going to be like half-assed today. Like, I'm just going to give it like 60, right? Like, and nobody, generally, also wakes up, like coaches don't generally wake up and be like, I want to screw over so-and-so. They don't have ill intent. Yet a
No.
lot of athletes kind of think that about their coaches, or coaches think, oh, so-and-so is just going to like, they're just going to mail it in today, or they're going to sulk, or they don't care. Or they're not going to work hard. Like we don't want to ever write off a player. Now, could they show that they care more? Like I like that verbiage. I remember actually used that back. I was like, I know you all care, but I want to see it more. Does that make sense? Like they care,
Yeah.
but it's like they're like reserving it and not showing it and like not putting themselves out there. Or I know you're working hard, but I want you to push yourself. Like you feel like you're going at 100, but you've got more in you. And one of the things I like to unpack sometimes, well, why isn't someone pushing as hard as they absolutely can? Well, usually because they're overthinking, or they're in their own head, or they're doubting themselves, or there's some kind of noise. And so, whatever it is, but like we want to be careful against like the confidence thing. Oh, you have a problem. You're not good enough. You need more of it versus,
Yeah.
hey, you care. You are working hard. Can we work harder though? Is asking the questions to get them to reflect and like push their comfort level, and without, demeaning them and like putting them down and putting this negative spin on things, like, attacking their integrity. And like, it's like, especially depending on the environment, but most, I'm sure, like a lot of them are in competitive environments. You judge a competitive person's care and work ethic, like they're not going to like you. Like that makes sense. Like, and that's not a healthy way to coach. Like that's old school beyond all belief. Well, I'm going to make them hate me so much that they play well. Oh, well, that's the days of that are being very numbered. It still exists a little bit, but it's, like you said, they're too aware. They're just, that it's not going to go well. And
You
you're
got
going
access to your book now, man. You can't,
there's
more
no
old school
excuses now.
tricks.
No
Yeah, you can't.
excuses.
They got too much good information now.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
I thought you used a great example in the book too. You talk about artists that, like, a successful artist, like, no kid says I'm going to be a successful artist because I think it's a way to make a boatload of money. They become artists because they want to make great art, and they want to turn whatever's inside their head and put it on paper or sculpt it or whatever in a song. And that, but the ones that generally approach it with that level of passion, where they're that intrinsically motivated, not saying they're going to make a boatload of money, but the odds would certainly go up. And I think it's interesting too. And I think there's two sides of this: is how how coaches approach players and how players approach themselves. Because the reality is, on every team in any organization, not everybody's the same. Not everybody has the same level of contribution, certainly from whatever KPIs you're using, whether that's goals, assists, output, sales targets, whatever.
Yeah.
But good organizations find a way to make everybody seem valuable. And I think that aligning on what is your why, is it art? Is it that you love being a part of the team? That, hey, you know what, you might not, see a lot of value in yourself as a checker or a shot blocker, but darn it, as your coach, I'm going to help you see that value, and we're going to celebrate it together. Just such an important message there.
Yeah, no, I love that. And there was a clip last week. I don't know if you saw it. I think it was an NCAA basketball player making reference to the bench team rehearsing and mastering the other team's routes and how they played all the time. It's like these guys.
I didn't. That's awesome.
Yeah, these guys are real heroes. I wish I knew the thing, but it just ties into.
You need to spend more time on social media. That's what I got there.
Yeah. I'm on it. I get off it quick. I'm like, what am I doing here? But but it goes into the motivation. Like, how do we get people intrinsically motivated? And a good way to look at it too, and understand this evolution over the last 50, 60, 100 years, like 100 years ago, like everything was just extrinsic motivation. It was carrot and stick. The way society was run was like, hey, we'll pay you more and you do hard work. There's punishment and so it's all extrinsic motivation. But creative endeavors, self-expressive endeavors, high performance, healthy cultures are, there's a ton of intrinsic motivation, right? Think of a company. Let's go outside of sport. Do you want someone to come work for your company that really doesn't have any alignment with your values or what you're about as a company? And they're just there for the paycheck, and they're like kind of good at their job and they do the job, but they don't really care. Like, that's not, there's too many jobs, and we don't need that, for most, fields of work. You can have intrinsic drivers, let alone when you're playing sport. and something that you choose
Oh
to do.
yeah.
That's a game, and it is a performance and an art in a lot of ways. And so, and there's a huge creative part to it. So we are blocking a lot of that when we're not allowing or encouraging or helping athletes tap into their intrinsic drivers. And doing that, one, not just with the top player, but like you said, even the bench players or the role players, and creating value and intrinsic drivers there as well. I think that's so important. And that's like this idea of like, yes, we have external results again, like we talked about right at the beginning, right? There's these external things, but we can separate that and we can still have an intrinsic why. Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? And the ability to tap into that leads to more likely the extrinsic. But the people that are just extrinsically motivated and that's their why, they usually actually do worse, and they'll cut more corners and not be fully expressive. So, and there's lots of good research that backs that up
Yeah.
too. So, yeah, no, it's a great point for coaches to be reflecting on. Again, like you've alluded to a couple of times, and I like the way you've described it. It's like, as coaches, particularly, having these different analogies and tools in your back pocket to keep, you got to keep evolving and keeping things
100%.
fresh.
Yeah.
And like, how can you connect? And like, this is what, like, I'm fortunate in a lot of ways because most of my day and week is spent one-on-one coaching someone on a Zoom like this, and trying to find ways. I'm always coming up with new analogies every week. Like I've got like 5 written down here on an old notepad to add in for new blog posts or something at some point, because it's like, okay, well, what's going to connect with this person with what they're going through right now? Right. And it might not be one of the ones I've used before. Sometimes it is. And I bring a lot of the old ones back, and I've used some of the best ones and I put them all in the book. Right. But it's this like, I got to keep evolving. I can't be like, oh, I've got my analogies now. And I kind of get to do that because I have the time to play with somebody one-on-one. And that's what my hope is for coaches, is they keep playing with that, and hopefully they get stuff out of the book, because that's how you can connect and keep things fresh and bring stories and analogies. That's how people really learn. And especially when we're talking about things that aren't so obvious, right? Even there's a funny way to look at this too. Think of like, oh, this is our forecheck. This is our like neutral zone. Let's do some X and O talk, but let's bring a story to it. All right. I know Daryl does this a bit. He's like, this forecheck is like, a dog on a bone, whereas this one's like a spider web, like it's a trap kind of thing, right? Like you bring a story and a narrative to different plays and tactics, it makes it gets you in the right mental state, understand it better, etc. I think there was a football team that did that with a bunch of plays, and they're like named a play after each player or something funny. But
listen, man, I think that's part of it. I think just to know, you talk about, you write it down. Like I would say that is one of the most consistent habits or attributes of some of the top coaches we work with, is all of them have something on hand with them all the time, a notebook that they take notes, and again, they think of things and they put it down. And it's not because I'm using this tomorrow. It might be like, I might use this, I might refer back to this on the dock 2 summers from now, and I might pull this, have this on hand, but they're constantly writing down these thoughts. So I would say that that's really important. I think another thing too is just to emphasize your point. Like, obviously, I'm based in Vancouver. Canucks, I think, are exceeding expectations this year. They're having a great year, and I was like, what's going on? And like, everybody's talking about their top players: JT Miller, Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, just having monster years. That's true. I would argue the biggest difference this year is that Sam Lafferty, Philip Giuseppe, tough last name, and say like Dakota Joshua. Like, these are players that, like, under previous regimes were just like, they were like, we're going to give you 8 hours of ice time just because, or sorry, 8 hours. We're going to give you your 8 minutes of ice time because we don't want to gas the superstars. Whereas this coaching staff has brought those players in, they've integrated them, they've provided roles. They haven't been afraid to put them in on the stage, and they've responded, and they're not going to lead the team in scoring. They're not. But I'll tell you what, when you watch the team inside out, they've created a value for those players, and those players are responding by saying, "Hey, you've added, you've identified or acknowledged the value that I bring to the team, and therefore I'm going to back you up." And I think that, just like, I would think that in all walks of life, like, that is the most powerful. You talk about intrinsic motivation, like, that's it. Like, if you show confidence in me, I don't want to let you down.
Yeah, no, 100%. So it's a constant thing for everyone to be working on, but especially as coaches and leadership roles, it's a good big important area, I think, to leading and creating a culture and motivating your players to get the most out of them. It's yeah, lots of nuggets to take from there, and hopefully not lots of nuggets to get out of the book. So
Totally. I want to finish here, Cass. Like this one, and I like to think that I've heard most sort of analogies or stories about sports. I hadn't heard this one before, but it really resonated with me. That's the flower bed story. Can you just maybe share with their audience, and then we can dive into it? I've got some thoughts.
yeah, it's one of my favorite analogies around motivation, and it's actually I adapted it, took it from John DeMartini. It was his story, but he tells it differently. So the way I started telling it is there's this 105-year-old lady who has she's like the matriarch of her community, and in her backyard she's got these two beautiful flower beds, right, one on each side, and these 12-year-old kids love to come and play there because they play football and they throw the touchdown and land in the soft flower bed. So the kids love it, they just love playing. But the lady, they don't like it. She's like, what are you guys doing? Like, stop playing. And the kids are like, screw you, lady. We're going to keep playing because they're kids. And this goes on for a while. And she's like, I got to come up with a solution to get them out of here. And so she thinks about calling the cops, but they're like, nah, they're 12 years old.
Yeah.
So she gets this sneaky idea to start paying them. And the kids are like, this is sick. We're all getting $5 to come and play this game that we love. And that goes on for a while. But then she starts to pay them less and less. It goes to $1 and then 50 cents and a quarter. The kids are like, screw this. We're not playing anymore. Forgot why they were playing in the first place. And so it really highlights, a lot of players, like, talk about your son, like they're falling in love with the game. And there's this intrinsic drive around playing, being in the moment and what they're doing in the game. And there's this love of the game that's being fostered and built. But then as they start to climb the ranks, they lose sight of that. We start to think about, okay, well, why I play now is to get drafted, to get to the next levels, to be a top goal scorer, and so on and so on. And it's even same for coaches too. Why are we doing what we do? Like, we want to stay connected to that versus, well, I got to help my team win and do this and that. And when you get your intrinsic why and stay connected to that, that's the greatest source of the flow of confidence and resilience and et cetera. So
100%.
So I really like that story is a great analogy that brings that point to life. And yeah, we use it a lot. So yeah, go ahead. What's your take on it?
No, so I read that and I loved it, but it was cringeworthy because I started thinking back to how many times when I coached where it was, you're because of this, you're not going to get the scholarship, or there's NHL scouts watching, you're not doing enough, or our teams, you're letting the team down because we're trying to win. And I'm like, oh man. And I'm like, again, like that's just, I will say this, when I thought about it, like the kind of the break I gave myself was like, that's human nature, right? Like it's human nature to talk and attach those sort of those rewards to it. But I'm like, I guess my point is I recognize that, man, if you were in a really present state as a leader, as a person, as a coach, and you could consistently train yourself to go back to that, that motivation of the why, and keep bringing and avoid the conversation about, it doesn't mean you might not pull a player into your office one-on-one and say, hey, I know you're here to try and get a scholarship. Let's talk about that pragmatically. But in terms of like, in an emotional sense, like leave that out of it and just keep going back to the why. I kept thinking like, man, that if you could do that, easier said than done. Man, there's a great coach, there's a great leader, but also I'd put my money on that team organization that can keep that focus on the why as to having the type of success that we all aspire to have.
Yeah. And it's a great point too, around like, think about John Wooden didn't talk about winning, like, right? Like that's one of the
exactly
things. And but like think of it then as a coach, like it's not just not talking about winning, it's not talking about scholarships, points, like winning the game, like all the little external
process
things, and especially not talking about it with somebody individually, let alone as a team. But like, hey, I got to motivate this guy. Hey, if you want more playing time, you got to like, that's threat, carrot and stick motivation. Like, no, let's go talk to, like, let's find out what drives him. Let's give him some individual definition of success and process that he can start building momentum and get an intrinsic driver and fuel that fire as the fundamental way of motivating. There's nothing wrong with extrinsic motivation as a clarity. It's just, it can get dangerous when it's the main source, right? And because then we lose sight of the intrinsic. And but sometimes I always use the analogy of put a little like gasoline and a little rocket fuel on top of the fire to get a little extra burst. Like you're playing against opponent that chirped you, it doesn't think you're very good. Like it can be a little like, oh, I'm gonna prove them wrong kind of
Sure.
mentality.
Yeah. And then you got, yeah.
So you can use that within reason, I think, but like the main source, that you want to stay in the culture of an organization that's very healthy is connected to the intrinsic drivers and the unique ones of each individual too, which takes time and energy, but then it's more sustainable. Instead of thinking about the time and energy it's cost a coach later in the season when he hasn't put in the groundwork and laid the relationship and understood the players and find out what makes them click. And now he's screaming and losing it and stressed out because so-and-so has given up and you can't connect and it's too little too late later in the season or years down the line. Now you're struggling to get the players going because you haven't put the time in early. Now you're dealing with all the headaches later, right? So downstream. So I think you invest in it up front. It doesn't always pay out right away, but it'll start to. And then it becomes easier to like pull that guy aside, have a nice little conversation with them and get more out of them because maybe you had a 15-minute one with them early in the season that helped connect. So,
Yeah.
And you do that throughout the season, depending on the coach and the level, how much time they have, but you're doing that. And that's your general approach. It's more fun as a coach. And like, to me, like why do coaches coach? Like, I think it's one of the like coaches, teachers, people that spend time, especially with large groups, to connect and guide them and create, and in these healthy environments and this fun space for them to be self-expressive and create and build bonds, it's so important and so needed. And so, and the intrinsic value coaches can get is like, hey, like I help them, they're growing, they're learning, they're evolving, they're maturing. Like that in of itself, people are building relationships. Like it's a lot of fun. Like I loved coaching minor hockey. Like I was a minor hockey coach way back, right? And it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of challenges, let's be clear, coaching minor hockey, which is a whole different
million percent. Yeah.
Yeah. But like there's a ton of intrinsic value in it. And so staying connected to that, I think is important. And that some of that is like the one-on-ones. It's the tough, the crucial moments where you're helping somebody click and grow. Like and then there's also the funny moments too, and the fun, like those things. But yeah, no, you bring up a great point with the threat of results and I'll share one last thing too. Like one of like the big inciting moments for me, and this has been a theme throughout my life. Like I was just so obsessed with the external results. Like it was my NHL draft year. I want to get drafted to the NHL.
And I'll just point out, you share this story in the book, which I thought was super relatable and valuable for any young player that picks it up.
I'm just so obsessed. I'm like, oh, I'm getting drafted. And I was on a starting lineup at the start of the season, the OHL. Like, it's going to happen. Here's all these goals I have. And I have this like yellow brick road for the next 5 years to be in the NHL. And like, I fell flat on my face. I had a 0-point year, healthy scratch 48 times, like real tough year. And the point of that is like, and it's been a theme throughout my life, and it's very easily like I get easily caught up with the shiny results. Like I was talking about earlier with my book. Oh, book launch. I was like, oh no, okay. You have my own internal definition of success.
But is it not worth acknowledging, Cassidy? Like,
yeah,
that's normal. Like the goal here is not to ever feel that way, because we're all going to feel that way. The goal here is to provide some tools.
Exactly.
Is to shift your focus, right?
Yeah. It's to become back to be mindset first. Who do I want to be versus what I'm alluding to, and like what people do. We become results first. We create a results first environment. We are thinking about results first as the priority versus shifting the priority to be like, what's my mindset? How do I want to approach this? How do I want to approach this book launch? How do I want to approach my NHL draft season versus just what results do I want to get? And so, or as a coach, how do I want to approach this next game, this next season, this next week, etc.? What is my priority? Who do I want to be? When we stay connected to that, that's where the intrinsic motivation is. That's where the clarity gets. That's where the creativity comes from, and the confidence that leads to the actions and increases the probability of results. And most importantly, you have a lot more fun along the way because you're happy with who you're being. Right.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I'll just, I know we're running out of time here, but I'll just finish with it. Because again, I just want to be clear, but this isn't like me. This is like, has been put into practice. This is just aspirational thinking as I go through it. So words matter. And anybody that thinks that great coaches, great leaders just wing it, they're mistaken. So as a point, I know nobody's supposed to like Mike Babcock. I like Mike Babcock. I think he's a good dude. He came to our conference last year, did a talk on the 2010 Olympics and just how he prepared. He shows up to his talk and he's got this binder. And he's like, do you think anybody would want to see any of this? I'm like, what is it? And he's like, here's every game card. Here's every pregame speech. Here's every meeting notes. Here's like, he has everything in this meeting. It's really clear. This wasn't like, this was all prepared in advance. So he never opened his mouth without connecting it back to the central message that he wanted to communicate. And I would tell everybody that this is consistent among elite coaches. They all have a version of this binder somewhere. Like they all have their game cards because they refer back to them. They learn from it. They're refining it. And so my point is that you talk about process that, you know, if I was to coach competitively again, one thing I would do, and I haven't done this in the past, but it really stuck with me in reading the book, is that the importance of writing down what your process is. And then anytime you have a message to your team, be it as an individual or as a team, is to really pause and think and say, am I tying my message back to this process? Because if you create the process, if you define it, but then your message or communication is always drawing people's attention back, you're not accomplishing what you hope to accomplish. You got to find a way. And I think the art of coaching is, how do you connect it back in a creative way, in a meaningful way, in an engaging way for your players so that it resonates with them. And again, I think that was probably my primary takeaway of like, that is the process we shall be going through as coaches, is to define that and then be really creative in how we keep bringing it back to that. But again, man, I kudos to you, because I think what you've provided is just, there's a lot of books that I read today that I wouldn't have read, or I wouldn't have gotten 2 pages deep into when I was 19 and 20 years old. But I think what you've created is a book that both players and coaches can go through. And I would encourage a lot of coaches, if you're looking for a Christmas gift for your team, here's something that through the second half of the season, you guys are going to be able to go through together. And it's just going to spark some really positive and meaningful conversations with your players that ultimately, I have no doubt, will show up in the on-ice result.
Yeah, no, I love that. And yeah, I encourage people to check it out. We do bulk orders as well. You can email us at info@drcassidypreston.com. So, and yeah, no, I appreciate those kind words. It's been a long time in the making. I know we were talking about off camera, but it's fun to get this out here, and we'll see the upkeep.
All right. Again, the book is Mindset First, and go to drcassidypreston.com to learn more. Cass, thanks for joining us, man. Great to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron. It was a pleasure.